A car that failed when it mattered most. A champion betrayed by his own machine. A silence inside Ferrari's garage that said everything. And a discovery that turned whispers into suspicion. Because what happened to Lewis Hamilton in Singapore might not have been an accident. By the time dawn crept over Singapore, the Ferrari garage no longer looked like a workplace. It felt like an interrogation room. The SF-25 sat stripped bare, its burned carbon panels laid out on white sheets, every piece tagged and photographed. The only sound came from the hum of the cooling fans and the quiet arguments of engineers trying to rewrite what the data refused to explain. Fred Vasseur stood in the center of it all, his face pale under the fluorescent light. The official story that the failure was thermal overload was already falling apart. The evidence, both mechanical and digital, said otherwise. Hamilton arrived just after sunrise, still wearing his team shirt, headphones hanging around his neck. He didn't speak to anyone at first. He walked slowly around the car, taking in the details, the melted duct, the warped caliper, the missing mesh. When he finally looked at Vasseur, there was no anger, only fatigue. "We can't keep pretending it's random," he said. His tone was calm, but the weight in his voice was unmistakable. It wasn't an accusation. It was a truth spoken out loud for the first time. And in that moment, something inside the team shifted. Vasseur had spent his career navigating crisis, politics, pressure, expectation, but this was different. This wasn't a public embarrassment or a strategic error. This was an ethical one. Someone, somewhere inside his organization, had either made a catastrophic mistake or done something intentional. Either way, it meant Ferrari's internal control systems had failed. He turned to his lead engineer, who stood frozen behind a laptop screen, and said, "From this point on, we rebuild everything: process, access, and trust." That was the moment Ferrari stopped treating the failure as a technical issue and started treating it as a human one. The following hours became a blur of investigation and confrontation. Mechanics were questioned separately, access logs rechecked, and the team's entire workflow audited line by line. The missing calibration file, the vanished mesh, the obstructed camera feed, none of it made sense in isolation, but together it painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. The sabotage theory, once dismissed as paddock gossip, now had substance. But proving it was another story. Formula One runs on layers of encryption and chain of custody records. Without a direct signature, all Ferrari could prove was that the system had been tampered with. Not who or why. Hamilton's composure through it all was unnerving. He didn't raise his voice or make demands. Instead, he observed. In every debrief, he asked questions that cut deeper than the engineers wanted to go. Who ran the calibration? Who verified the torque readings? Who checked the duct fitting? He wasn't chasing blame, he was chasing truth. And the more he asked, the clearer it became that the team structure had cracks in places no one had noticed before. Responsibilities overlapped. Procedures were assumed. Accountability was blurred. Ferrari, a name built on precision, had become vulnerable through its own complexity. Then came the quietest but most powerful moment of the night. During a private debrief, Hamilton said something that would stay with Vasseur long after the race. "You can build the fastest car in the world," he said, "but if you can't trust the people around it, it's worthless." It wasn't confrontation, it was warning. And Vasseur understood immediately that this was bigger than one race, one car, one failure. It was about Ferrari's soul, the constant tension between innovation and integrity. When the race ended, the garage should have been filled with the usual noise, tools clattering, screens flickering, radios buzzing. Instead, it was silent. Ferrari mechanics surrounded Hamilton's car like surgeons around a patient they couldn't save. The smell of burnt carbon hung in the air. The SF-25 sat still, its front left brake disc warped and cracked, the caliper housing scorched purple. On the outside, it looked like heat failure. Inside, something was far more unsettling. The team's telemetry, normally clean and consistent, showed irregularities that defied explanation. The data told two stories, one mechanical, one mysterious. The left-hand brake temperature rose beyond 900 degrees Celsius, while the right side stayed within range. Yet, according to the airflow sensors, both ducts were receiving the same volume of cooling air. The numbers didn't add up. The car's systems couldn't explain how one side could boil while the other remained balanced. That was the first red flag. The second came from the brake-by-wire control log. It showed a software reset less than 30 minutes before the formation lap, a reset no one had authorized. Fred Vasseur's expression said everything. When he saw the timestamp, he turned to his technical chief and asked a single question. Who accessed this? The room went quiet. The engineers checked access logs, but the system had been wiped cleanly, efficiently, deliberately. In modern Formula One, such a thing shouldn't be possible. Every calibration change leaves a trace. Every input is timestamped. Every command is logged. But in Hamilton's SF-25, the record stopped. The moment that file vanished, so did Ferrari's ability to prove what had really happened. Officially, Ferrari called it a technical anomaly. Unofficially, it felt like sabotage. The idea wasn't born out of paranoia. It came from the evidence. The carbon lining inside the left front duct had detached inward, folding over itself in a way that shouldn't have been possible without physical interference. The component had been fitted correctly before the race. Hamilton's race engineer, who oversaw the assembly, confirmed that every part was checked and signed off. The damage pattern didn't suggest vibration. It suggested manipulation, subtle, deliberate, and expertly timed. Hamilton himself was calm, but inside he was furious. He had spent 2 days warning that the brakes felt unstable, that something in the balance wasn't right. The pedal feels strange, he'd said in FP3. It's not consistent. His tone wasn't frustrated, it was focused. He knew the difference between wear and interference. He'd felt both. When the car finally failed, it wasn't shock that crossed his face, but recognition. He already knew what had gone wrong. What he didn't know was why. Ferrari's leadership tried to contain the speculation. Publicly, Vasseur blamed overheating caused by Singapore's unique conditions. Privately, he ordered an internal audit of every system accessed within 24 hours of the race. Mechanics were questioned, engineers cross-checked, even data technicians from Maranello were contacted in the middle of the night. No one admitted to anything, but one thing was clear. Someone had tampered with the calibration process. Whether it was a mistake or something intentional, no one could say. But inside the Ferrari garage, trust, the one thing that holds a Formula One team together, began to evaporate. The forensic teardown of Hamilton's SF-25 began just after midnight. Every engineer in the garage knew that what they were about to find could either confirm a mechanical failure or expose something far more troubling. The car's front left corner was stripped down under the harsh light of the inspection bay. The carbon dust shimmered on the floor like ash. The brake housing, when removed, looked less like a component and more like evidence. Heat had eaten through the caliper body, the internal sensors had fused into the casing, and the duct walls bore a spiral pattern, the mark of turbulent airflow collapse. But it was what they didn't find that worried the most. The cooling mesh filter was missing. That filter, a small titanium we've designed to prevent internal debris from entering the system, had vanished entirely. On Hamilton's car, it had been logged as fitted during pre-race assembly, but the data tag confirming its installation was blank. When engineers reviewed the footage from the garage cameras, the moment of assembly was conveniently blocked from view by one of the team's own tool carts. The absence of that part changed everything. Without it, airflow into the brake duct could become unstable, creating pressure waves strong enough to force the duct lining to fold inward. That single piece, barely the size of a postcard, had the power to trigger the entire collapse. The official explanation was installation error, but the senior engineers weren't convinced. The filter couldn't simply fall out. It was secured with titanium fasteners requiring a torque wrench to remove. The marks on the duct edges showed signs of deliberate loosening. The bolts weren't stripped, they were unfastened cleanly. The question no one could answer was when. The car's systems had shown perfect brake performance during the installation lap and the first stint. Only in the final 20 laps, after Hamilton switched to the harder tire compound, did the cooling flow readings begin to fluctuate. That timing was too precise to be accidental. Fred Vasseur knew he was walking a tightrope between explanation and implication. When the engineers showed him the report, he stared at it for a long time before asking, could this have been triggered electronically? The answer was uncomfortable. Yes, in theory. The SF-25's brake-by-wire control system could adjust pressure bias and regeneration levels, altering thermal load distribution. If the software glitched, it could overheat one side while compensating for the other. But the calibration file that should have shown those adjustments was missing. Deleted. Not corrupted, erased. And in Formula One, nothing erases itself. That discovery changed the tone of the investigation. What began as a technical review turned into a containment operation. Ferrari quietly isolated the car, restricted access to its telemetry servers, and ordered a system-wide audit. Engineers who had worked in Hamilton's group were reassigned, and the brake assembly was shipped directly to Maranello under armed transport, a level of security usually reserved for championship-critical components. Inside the factory, specialists ran micro-CT scans on the parts, mapping every fracture, every heat scar, every missing layer of carbon. The results pointed to a single conclusion: external interference. Something or someone had changed the car after its final check. For Hamilton, the technical details hardly mattered anymore. He didn't speak publicly about sabotage, but privately, he asked the only question that mattered to a driver. Could this have been prevented? The engineers couldn't give him an honest answer. They knew the car had shown warning signs: a sudden fluctuation in hydraulic pressure, a momentary spike in temperature that was dismissed as sensor noise. But the decision to keep pushing had been made collectively. It looked stable on the graph, one mechanic admitted later. But we forgot that graphs can lie.